classroom. I would spend 2 weeks at the beginning of the year going in and putting all these wonderful, colorful things all over in my classroom, right? And to make it, visually pleasing, I thought. And then when she came in and we had talked about, how, people's brains, they're not always the same, and what might be attractive to you might be distracting to somebody else. So I spent a long time redoing my classroom that year, and it was huge. It was amazing.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us again on our podcast, FASD Through a Variety of Lenses. In this episode, we are excited to sit down with two classroom teachers. Both of these teachers have had different opportunities to learn about an FASD-Informed approach from PopFast. It will be interesting to hear how this approach has impacted their teaching practice and the effect it has had on their students. As well, I am really looking forward to this conversation because one of the teachers is brand new, finishing her first year, and the other one has taught for over 27 years. All right, so let's get to it. Why don't we start off by sharing a little bit about yourselves?
I'm Nona. I taught 27 years in the elementary school system, from actually grade 2 to grade 7. So I've taught all those. And right now, currently, I'm teaching at an alt-ed school, and I've been here for 2 years.
Awesome, thank you. And Karina?
I'm Karina. I just finished up my first full year of teaching.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm fresh and full of energy. And I'm at the same school that you taught at and that Nona had taught at as well.
Awesome. And what grade do you teach right now?
I teach grade 4-5.
Awesome. Very cool. And last year you picked up a small little contract as a resource teacher at a different school?
Yeah.
Yes.
For May and June, I picked up an LD as a resource teacher.
Cool. Right out of university.
Out of university.
You graduated on the 27th and you had a contract on like the 30th?
On the 30th,
On the 30th. Oh, wow.
Just the weekend in between.
Awesome. Okay, so next question. In just maybe a couple sentences, what do you love about teaching? Nona, do you want to start this one off?
It's got to be the kids, right? And also the other friends that you make, right? Our colleagues, and I also love learning.
Yeah.
I love learning how to figure out how to teach these kids.
Yeah. Never ending, eh?
Exactly.
Yeah. Very cool. Thank you. And Karina?
The kids, obviously, and the relationships you build with them, and the role that you hold in their lives. And just being that smiling face that they know they get to see day in and day out throughout the whole year. And the learning that happens every day with them and with me and my other colleagues.
All right, so one of the reasons why I wanted to sit down with you is that you both have had opportunities to learn about an FASD-informed approach from PopFast. And so I was hoping that this two-part question, can you share what that training looked like? And then the second part, maybe a couple things from that training that afterwards it kind of stuck with you and you maybe decided to implement within your classroom.
There's quite a bit. During teacher training, we had Stacy Wakabayashi come in and give a presentation to our cohort on an FASD-informed, approach to teaching and just some background information on FASD.
Within that, was there anything that stuck out to you, and maybe if you recall from any of the other university students you were sitting with, was there anything that was like you heard or you left there with that?
We definitely all agreed that it was one of the most informative presentations of our entire teacher training. The 8 keys definitely stuck with a bunch of us, and especially with you coming back into the school and teaching our whole school about the 8 keys. Also having Stacy's sort of scenarios that he was in and seeing how he reacted to certain students and some of the approaches that he took were really helpful. And then also in my brief stint as a resource teacher, I sought out Stacy's knowledge to help me work with one of my students on my caseload. And that was really helpful as well.
Awesome. Very cool. And Nona?
I was involved with a co-teaching series with some other high school colleagues, because I was coming from the elementary system and then into the secondary system. So that was really nice because I saw the lens of the older students and the teachers that they had and how that fit together. So we met once a week for, I think it was, I want to say 8 to 10 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And it was amazing. It's basically really helped me know how to use those 8 keys, even though I was familiar with them, and that in this setting with the older students, right? Because I always had that foundation of the younger kids, and yes, I need to have visuals, I need to do things in my classroom, and I realized I have to do that here too, right?
What age group do you have here?
I have grade 10.
Okay.
9 and 10, a few 9s and 10s, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that co-teaching, was that, you said, a weekly kind of training session with the PopFast teacher consultant, and they would go over like the FASD-Informed practice?
Oh,
and,
definitely.
yeah.
Yes, it was great. 8 keys and the brain and strategies. And what was really nice is that we heard about the strategies, but then you got to go back that week.
Yeah.
You tried them out, but then you got to share how it went with all the other teachers. And we each had a different, right, experience and different things, and then we learned from each other as well.
Oh,
so
yeah.
that was really cool.
That is really cool. You know, we do a fast class, which is like 4 sessions, hour and a half each session. And that's the same thing that I hear from the participants is their favorite part about that fast class series is that they get to collaborate together. Very cool. And was there anything from that co-teaching that really stood out to you and that you implemented within your classroom from that one?
What was huge for me is the environment, and that we don't want all these visuals all over my classroom. I would spend 2 weeks at the beginning of the year going in and putting all these wonderful colorful things all over in my classroom, right?
Yeah.
And to make it, visually pleasing, I thought.
Yeah.
And then when she came in and we had talked about, how, people's brains, they're not always the same, and what might be attractive to you might be distracting to somebody else. So I spent a long time redoing my classroom that year, and that was the year before I left.
Yeah.
And it was huge.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And I continue to do that here.
Yeah. So just limiting that sensory input of like having so much stimulus kind of.
And even the colors that you're supposed to use, like a neutral kind of beige color, and just how you organize your classroom so there's not so many things that you see. Like we had curtains over the shelving, so and then being very specific as to if you're going to put something up, that it needs to be why you're putting it up and why the students, it's got to be a tool that the students are going to be able to use, right?
Yeah.
And that if you do put up things, and we did, it was taught and we used them so that then they knew, oh, okay, we used that together in that lesson, okay, now I can use this. And then we could,
Everything has a purpose. I know
everything had a purpose.
when I first started teaching, I felt like, okay, I have my own classroom now. This is awesome, but now I need to like acquire stuff. And I remember being in a staff room and like where people would like discard a whole bunch of stuff that they didn't want anymore.
And you'd grab it all.
Grabbing it all and putting up this like 80s poster of this monkey with a banana. And the quote was like, homework makes me go bananas.
Yeah, I know, right?
And I put that up for like 3 years because I thought it was hilarious and it was pretty funny. So very cool. Thank you, Nona, for sharing that. And I would just share when Jody came into our school and kind of did that just generic what is FASD presentation. That was the first time that I got that. And I think that was probably maybe my 6th year there. And it made a lot of sense. She spoke on how individuals that are prenatally exposed to alcohol can have slower processing. And that was the first time that I kind of really thought about not just my students that were designated, but other students, because she also talked about the prevalence and the challenge of getting that diagnosis, that there's a good chance that there's other students that are impacted by alcohol that will not have that designation. And how many students benefited from when I took what Jody was saying about that processing speed and really slowed down what I wanted to share, especially if it was important, and repeated it, like you had mentioned, the 8 keys, because that was shared as well. And so a lot of these strategies, things from PopFast coming in really did make an impact on the way that I kind of presented information, kind of the way that I taught. So glad to hear that kind of worked with you guys as well. All right, so next question. As a teacher, we know the importance of relationships. What are some ways you connect with your students, and how has it impacted them? So Karina, let's start off with you.
What I love, definitely my favorite thing about teaching are the relationships that I have with my students. Well, every Monday morning, they know that we have circle, but except we call it jelly bean because there's too many kids in the class to actually have a complete circle. So we have a jelly bean, and they look forward to it every Monday because they get to tell everybody about their weekend, and they know they each get the time with nobody else interrupting. They hold our talking piece, which is a finger puppet squirrel named Mr. Pickles Chuck Norris, because when we're 10, we name everything. Yes. And they get to pass around the talking piece and share about their weekend. And I always make a point of starting off and sharing about my weekend. And I'm very real with them when I share about my weekend. Like if I have a weekend that, wasn't really great, I'll tell them, I didn't really have that good of a weekend. And, I was really excited to come here Monday morning and get to see all your faces and, turn my week around and make it a whole lot better. Same with when, I feel like me being real with them is a really key part to our relationship. Because whether I'm having a really good day or a tired day, or, I'm really reflective on how I'm feeling to sort of model, that we're not always feeling 100%, but, there are ways that we can still get through our day and ways we can still make our day better and how we adapt. And I feel like, in turn, they're quite expressive to me, how they feel, and, being able to model behavior and mood and strategies for coping with how you're feeling, I feel like is really important to our relationship as well. Yeah. And just giving them a lot of choice too, I feel is huge. They basically everything they do, they have a choice. It's either this or this. I don't care what you choose to talk about or what, topic you want, or even how you write it. Like, I just would like you to complete this. How you go about it is, up to you. And I think they really appreciate having that choice in terms of, in terms of academics and in terms of like doing fun activities throughout the day. Like if they need a movement break, lots of movement breaks. If they need a movement break, I'm not going to make you do a go noodle. If you want to play mini sticks, play mini sticks. If you want to just walk around, walk around.
So are you kind of saying that you actually treat them like real people?
I do.
And Nona, how about yourself? Some ways that you connect with your students and how has it impacted them?
And you know what? I'm very similar to you, right? Being real. We do a daily check-in. And it looks different depending on what the kids want to do. It might be sitting around talking. It might be throwing a ball that has questions on it and getting them to respond. It might be like a would you rather, going for a walk. But I'm always sharing about myself, because I think that with any relationship, you learn about that person by sharing yourself, right? And same with you. If I have a crappy weekend or something happens, I tell them. And I've actually broken down and cried in front of them. And I think it kind of shocks them at first, but oh my gosh, the the compassion and the kindness that you get, they, it's like amazing, right? And they're wonderful people, right? And you treat them like a wonderful person, and you treat them like you care, and we do care. But you also do tell them when you're feeling disrespected, and I did that a lot in my class. I would say, you know, the way you responded to me right now makes me feel horrible. And I'll never forget coming here to working with the older kids. I was kind of like, oh, do I know how to connect with these kids? Because I've been in with the younger kids all this time, right? And so I was kind of a little scared, but I was like, no, I'll just, you know, share about myself, shared about my kids and my pets and things that are happening to me. And they responded. They started sharing about their things and some of the things I didn't know about. So they were actually, I've learned a lot. A lot of new terms I didn't know before. But, you know, I'm like open to like, oh, I didn't know that. And they're like shocked, like, you mean you want to know about that? I was like, well, kind of, yeah. So yeah.
The importance of relationships seems to be becoming more and more prominent in like on Twitter and on Edutopia, like all these kind of different things that are coming out with research about the importance of relationships. And I'm just wondering, in your 27 years of teaching, have you noticed that? Like, did you, in that evolution of that teacher-student
definitely.
Connection?
My first year, way back when, I honestly felt for the first little while that I was like a warden, a prison warden. And I'd be like, no, you can't do this and that and whatever. And I was like, this is not what teaching's about. Like, what am I doing wrong? I thought I had to keep them in line. I thought they had to toe the rules. Well, I mean, we do need to do that, but in the way I was doing it, right, was not, it didn't work, right? I mean, yeah, they responded because, I mean, I had a bigger bark than they did, right? But I didn't have the connections, I didn't have the relationships, right? And I learned that really quickly. But it was a tough school too. So a lot of the teachers, speaking of one of the teachers you mentioned, she was actually afraid of my kids the first year she was there. Right? She was like, oh my God, I can't understand how you're not afraid of them, right? And I'm like, they're just kids, but they've been through things that we wouldn't even imagine. So yeah, I need to change something. And that was the number one thing I figured out very early, right? And then it just keeps going to here. And then I'll never remember last year, one of my students was having a hard time, you know, doing one of my assignments. And another thing that I always felt with all my students is I had to explain why I was doing things. Because in their mind, fairness is huge. Right? So why am I doing this and this other person isn't, and whatever, and explaining all that, but just why I'm asking you to do this and how is it connected to everything else? And the student just wasn't buying into this, and I was feeling really crappy. And one of my colleagues noticed, and a youth care worker, we have lots of youth care workers here, and she said, well, do you want to just sit down with that person and talk? And she facilitated us talking. And I actually broke down. And I was like, I said, you don't realize that I spent like 3 hours on that lesson for you, and I made it specifically for you, and I did it different for somebody else, and it took me a long time. And then when you don't even want to try that, I said, that upsets me, because I took all that time last night doing that for you. And the look on the person's face was like shock, and he goes, I'm sorry, I did not realize you do that for me. And it was amazing, because now he actually thanks me, right? And it was just being honest. They really don't know how much time
Yeah.
we put in, and they don't sometimes really understand how much we care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
That's so true. And just kind of speaking on behalf of that relationships piece, in my classroom, I don't know, are you familiar with like the 2x10? I think I've shared the 2x10 with you, but it was the same thing of where some of the students that I struggled with the most, when I started doing the 2x10, which was the idea is like meet with a student for 2 minutes, 10 days in a row and kind of get to know them. We did something a little bit different where I was meeting with one student for 5 to 10 minutes per day and then a different student the next day. But it was within that time frame, within those 5 to 10 minutes, that some of the students I was struggling with the most had so much going on in their lives and I had no clue. And it just gave me that increased patience and empathy for their responses to when I was asking them to do something or, you know, and just how honest and open they are when you're honest and open with them. And that changed. And you know how it is, like as teachers, when you kind of get some of those more challenging students on your side, it changes the whole mood of that classroom. And then you sort of like, and then that just allows for more and more students to kind of like build that classroom environment as they kind of understand that you're there to support them and help them. So same thing, like sitting down and getting to know these kids and what they're going through makes such a difference. Has it evolved for you? I know you've just been teaching for a year, but like from the beginning of the year, having your very first class till now, have you noticed a difference in kind of like how you approach that connection and that relationship piece?
At the beginning of the year, I remember thinking, oh, you know what? Like, I feel like I know these kids pretty well. But looking back on it in May, I'm like thinking, oh my goodness, like giving up these kids to the next teacher next year, it's like, but those are my kids. Like, I feel like, you know, we're with each other all day, every day. And I can see how teaching would be a lot different if you don't take the time to establish those relationships at the beginning. Like, because I think September, October, I mean, we did academics, but not nearly as much as we are now because I've spent so much time, you know, building a repertoire with them and establishing routine and getting to know them. And for them to trust me, it was just as important as me being able to trust them, because I feel like now that we've established that, you know, I'm not just getting them to do work just because, you know, I think part of that is the routine too. Like, we have the same routine every week. They know that on Friday afternoons they get ketchup and pickles, which is a time where if they haven't finished all their work for the week, that's their time to catch up. But if they finished all their work, then they get a pickle. So they get to, you know, go on Prodigy on the computer, play Twister, you know, draw on the whiteboards, you know, do some sort of activity. And I think that having those things, it took a bit to like implement and for them to get used to, you know, what that structure is going to look like. But now that they know, like, they want to get their work done, they're working through their, what we call mindfulness time, which is after lunch. Instead of silent reading, they can read, but it's just silent time. I put calming visuals on the screen, like a beach, and there's waves crashing or there's calming music, and that's their time to just chill out after recess and lunch. And now that they know that they want to have their fun time during ketchup and pickles time, they'll work through that. They'll like catch up on their work on their own time because like, you know, they want to have that pickles time at the end of the week. And I mean, it's about an hour and a half that we could be doing socials or science, but to have them buy into what I'm doing because, you know, they want to get it done, and to have that time for kids who are like, you know, absent throughout the week or.
And by Friday, a lot of our complex learners, especially Friday afternoon, they're done. And so to get them to do those science or socials, as you say, is can be very difficult. All right, so and that kind of touches on the environment. So we know that environment, which is the structure of the classroom setting, can have a big impact on student learning. So in your classrooms right now, is there anything that's really working well for you that you would like to share? And Nona, how about I start off with you? It's kind of a big question, but like in your classroom, like what's working for you when it comes to the structure of it or the setting?
Well, like I said, I set my room up the same way I had in the elementary school system, and actually it was interesting because when I did that, these older kids were like, kind of feels like an elementary school in here, and I'm like, okay, so, but do you know where everything is? Yeah, I don't have to get anything for you, right?
Yeah.
And I also implemented, like they have their own portfolios, so I actually don't need to hand things out at the front of the room. They can go into their own folders, so more independence in that way. But so things that are up on the walls are there for a purpose. There's things, it's very spacious. I have desks that are actually large enough, which was my biggest pet peeve being in an elementary school, is having, 5'10" grade 7 boy who had size, 12 feet and was sitting in a teeny tiny little desk.
Yeah.
That's not comfortable.
Yeah.
Right? So that was huge for me. So I actually, in my room, have really big desks or tables, and they can sit there. I have comfortable chairs. I have office rolly chairs. I have the kind of stool wobbly chairs, and then I have the normal kinds of chairs. So different kinds of sitting seats for them, so that they're actually comfortable.
Yeah. And do they get to choose as well?
They choose.
Yeah. So that option of choosing
So some days, when somebody's trying to stay awake or whatever, they'll switch to the wobbly kind of stool seating, and then when they aren't feeling like, lots of them, physically sometimes, if they've been hiking and doing lots of other kinds of things outside, or skateboarding, longboarding now that they do, they choose their seating.
Yeah.
And that was really important.
Nice.
Yeah.
And Karina, how about yourself? In your class setting, is there anything that you can think of that you purposefully do to support those students?
Yeah, the seating as well. We have a wiggle seat. We have one of those spiky blue seats that are kind of like inflatable. There's the 3 spin bikes at the back of the class, which are huge. And now, kind of by accident, we now have a camping chair.
I've seen that.
That is in rotation. Yeah, and it's cool because we have a list. That way it's inclusive and all of the students get the opportunity to use the fun seats. And I just go down the list and they remind me every morning, oh, we didn't do the seats yet. So we do the seats. And it's cool because at first when I started it, I thought, oh, they're just going to they're all going to want them and they're going to sit on them even if they, just to have them, you know. But now it's neat because a lot of them will be like, no, I don't want it. You can go to the next person.
Oh, nice. So that novelty is kind of worn off, and then all the kids who need it will use it.
And same with the bikes. The bikes are awesome for when there's a lot of discussion time. And again, we had to establish the expectation of if you're on the bike, how to pedal on the bike properly.
Oh, nice, yeah.
And you're not talking if you're on the bike. And now I even trust them to put the laptops or grab a clipboard, and they can do their work on the bikes too, even.
Nice.
Or on the little shelf beside the bikes.
Yeah.
They'll even do their work on there too. And some students more than others, I will ask them, hey, do you want to go on a bike right now? Because I can see they're getting a little squirrely. Even I don't care if they're kind of sitting off their seats. I have a few students, especially lately, I don't know if it's getting warmer out or they're, just kind of falling off the train a little bit, but they won't even sit in their seat. They'll kind of just crouch down in front of their desk.
Yeah.
I'm sure. As long as you're comfortable and you're doing your work, you can lay on the floor. I really don't care how you do your work, but they have the option of how they sit. We have a table at the back where there's certain students who I prefer to sit back there because I know that they really do benefit from the, more individualized support. But then once those few spots are taken, I'll be like, hey, who else wants to sit back there today?
Oh, nice.
And everybody wants to, and it's really neat. And I try to make it fair for oh, you haven't got to sit back there yet. You can go sit back there. And it makes it more inclusive for the students who, by grade 5, they kind of know, that they really do benefit from that extra support, or that certain students often, work back there. But it's really cool to see that everybody wants to work back there.
Yeah.
And it makes it a neat environment for the students who more often work at the back.
One thing I picked up there is that's so great, and I think often we kind of forget about it. You were saying you teach how to use those spin bikes, and all too often we have things in our classroom that we just hand out or we give, or we just expect students to know, and then they don't use it properly, and then then we give them a consequence or take it away. And so many kids potentially might be missing or lagging skills, and kind of need that repetition, that direct teaching of that skill. And so and when I had the spin bikes in my classroom too, that was such an essential and important part of what were the expected behaviors on those spin bikes, if you're going to use them and whatnot. But that's great. And it's for any tool, whether it's the headphones that you use, or the wiggly seats that both of you have in your classroom, because there's the potential for falling off and hurting yourself. But if you give the expectations and you teach it, then they generally do a really good job.
I think in terms of like environment too, the students know where everything is. They know, I don't even have to say the paper is on the side anymore. They just know, if I say, can you grab a piece of lined paper, they know to look in their desk, and if they don't have one, to just go off to the side where I have lined paper. Or even handing things out. The students know that someone's going to hand out their paper, and they know how to hand out their paper. But I think that's a lot of repetition and a lot of, they have learned, they've been taught how to.
And that's that routine. And when I've been in your classroom, that's so evident within your class of the how you have built that routine within those students, and how that reduces the anxiety.
Yeah, well, actually, one thing when you're talking about that and routine, something that I have carried on and that my kids appreciate here with the older ones, is that I have a schedule on the front of the board that tells them exactly what we're going to be going through, and all the electives that are going to be that day, and they look at it every day so they can see what their day is like, just like us, right? Like we like to know what's coming. And if there's a change, also, especially for those kids who don't like change, they can see, what's coming up. I also have the calendar for the month. So things get scheduled in, and then they know.
And that's important too, because especially in elementary, when there's field trip forms going out and all these different wacky hair day or whatever, right? To have that visual of the month to kind of help keep them on track. And executive functioning, that planning, organizing, can be a challenging area for students with FASD. So having those visually present all the time is huge. Okay. So the FASD-informed approach also looks at the importance of providing accommodations and strategies to support students in instruction and curriculum. So what have you noticed that's helped your students? So when providing support for your students, taking a look at how you teach things, or maybe some of the resources that you use, what have you noticed that have been beneficial for your students? What have you done in your past? So thinking about, so for myself, I noticed that when I broke steps down or the instructions, and even more recently, Meredith Curie with PopFast has shared a lot of Sarah Ward's stuff, Get Ready, Do, and Done. And in that last year, I was using that in my classroom, where you show them, you work your way through, and you start at the done to show them the end product, and then you show them the do, which is kind of like what you have to do to get that end product, and then the get ready, what are the necessary materials that you need to have in order to do that. So that would be an example for myself, I think, when it comes to instruction, of kind of always having that end product for the students reduced a lot of anxiety and a lot of frustration of if they ever got stuck on something, they always kind of were able to look at that end step. But that was for me. How about Nona? Let's start off with you, and then we'll go to Karina.
A funny thing, I always like to have examples. So every year I would keep an example of a previous person's assignment. And I do change things all the time, but I always try to look for a student example, right? To share so that they know and have that end product. But I also write down my learning intention. What is it that you want to know? Why are we doing this, right? And sometimes I ask them, I may kind of let them tell me what they think I want them to learn. And it's kind of interesting at first when they do that, they're like, what do you mean they're learning attention? Well, I want you to learn something specific here. So what do you think it is, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was always giving it to them, but then when I asked them what it was interesting because it made them think even more. Because again, okay, I wonder what it was, right?
Yeah.
So that's huge for the way I do things. I actually had to redo a lot of lessons from here because it's very individualized and they had a lot of kind of modular kinds of things, but I redid them and put the learning intentions on.
Yeah.
And then the steps, breaking down the steps.
Mm-hmm.
And then that way you can say to that one student, I only need you to do step 1 and 2. Or another student might be doing 1, 2, 3, 4,
mm-hmm.
right? But it all looks the same,
Yeah.
which was also important for my older students when I was, in elementary for the 7s. They always want things to look the same for everything, right?
Yeah.
And then even here too, right? Like, well, you only need to actually do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the way I kind of did with that. And the overhead. Like, I thought, coming to the older kids, I might not have to show an example, but using the overhead projector, huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's still huge. Honestly, I don't know how I taught before.
Right, that's such a game changer, that overhead projector, the document camera,
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
how much that supports those students. Yeah. Karina, how about yourself?
One thing that, like, going forward next year that I definitely want to focus on more is, like, having those examples because, everything is new for the first time this year, so any examples I need to make. So I'm definitely looking forward to having, student examples that I can keep from year to year now.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, breaking things down into steps for sure. I'll get everybody to freeze before we do anything and make sure that I have everybody's attention before we go through steps, because I know that if I'm talking and they're not listening, then we might get 2 of the steps, or we might, whenever you're done explaining things and then you get that, so what do I do?
Oh, yeah.
So one thing I'll do is sometimes I'll write up the steps on the board. I'll say, first you're going to do this, then you're going to do this. And it's, of course, whenever you say the first step, everybody starts to do it. And it's like, freeze.
Yeah.
Wait till I'm done, and then you can do all your steps. Having students call back the steps afterwards, just to, reiterate. Or if maybe I have a few that I want to make sure really paid attention to the steps. And plus, it always helps hearing it from their peers, too, what the steps are.
So we have one more kind of like classroom question, and then we got the 2 stars and a wish coming up. So our last classroom question is, when it comes to classroom management, we know that adding more consequences and punitive discipline doesn't always help the child with FASD or our complex learners. So I'm curious, what do you find, or what do you do in your classrooms to support students and their behaviors and help them follow in the classroom rules and expectations and so forth? So outside of that punitive and discipline, what have you found in your 1 year and in your 27 years to have the most positive impact on students?
I think what I've learned is that the punitive definitely doesn't work, but that when you really have all your lesson really thought out and it's at the students' levels and you've got some choice, and you continue to support them, that you don't, and you listen to them, that honestly, when you have those disciplinary kinds of things, it's all about taking them and listening to them and trying to figure out what it is that's actually the problem, right? And that's the tricky thing in the elementary school, because you have all these other people around and you're trying to figure this out. But also, again, taking the time to kind of not kind of jump in right away to say, oh, this has to stop, whatever. Trying to think, okay, so why is that person behaving like that? Works too hard, something's happened here, something's happened there, and taking the time to very quickly kind of say, okay, maybe this person needs to just have a break. Then we'll go back and we'll talk about it and try and figure it out. But it's come to the point where I honestly don't have any discipline issues anymore when you have all those things in place, right?
So the time to talk with the students to find out, like, because I would imagine you might not have the discipline issues, but you have students that at times would refuse to do work.
So I would always have them come out of the classroom and take the time to say, okay, so what's going on, right? Like, get them to explain, okay, I did this, that, okay, so why do you think you did that? Okay, so this is what I saw. Is that what you were thinking? Like, and try and get down to the bottom of what's kind of happening here. And if you don't have time to kind of say, okay, so what you just did, tell me what you did, okay? And I say, well, this is what I saw, and this is what's happened, okay? Is that fair? Is that respectful, right? I use that so much with discipline. Like, you just took that person's pencil away and broke it. Is that being respectful? Would you like somebody to do that to you, right? And just talking to them like that, and then when you have the time to actually go over that and explain and stuff, because most kids want to do things that are good. They don't want to do those things, but it's out of frustration. There's always some underlying reason, right? And once they know that you are wanting to understand that, it kind of is like at the last point when I was, where I was teaching, I honestly would just have to look at them and say, we'll talk about it later, but now stop. And they respected me. They trusted me enough to know that I would help with whatever it was, and if something wasn't fair or somebody was doing something to them or whatever, we would solve it together. And that trust really helped in behaviors.
It sounds like what you do to support students with behaviors in classroom, it's relationships.
Yes.
Like, it goes back to you're spending time with them proactively, you're spending time with them figuring out what's going on, and afterwards, and that trust that you've built within that relationship. So there's not any kind of like magic steps that you use. It's just a matter of
I always said to all my students that I would be fair, but I need you to be honest with me. And I would help you solve it, and then we need to talk. It's all about communication, right? You need to talk to that other person. That person I can see is really upset. Do you see that? Okay, so you need to understand why they're upset, right? So that doesn't happen again.
Have you noticed that giving them time to process is a huge part of that?
Yeah, because a lot of it is reactive, right? So they need to, but they also need to know that you're not going to be reactive.
Yeah.
And lots of times as teachers, you have all these kids in the room, and somebody here is doing something and somebody here is doing something, right? So for lots of times it would be like, turn the lights off, put your heads down, because I need a break. You all need a break, and then stop and think, right? Like, some of you are causing, some chaos in here. Like, why is that? Some of you are having to live in this or be a part of this. So to me, someone might say, talk them to death, because my own kids say that. Mom, yeah, we get it. Right? Do you really get it? Do you understand that? Right? But yeah, they knew I was going to get to the bottom of it, and I was going to be fair.
Yeah.
And that seemed to work for me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Karina, how about yourself?
It's really cool hearing you say it with those words, because like thinking about, I'd never really thought about how I actually, go about consequences and whatnot. Like it's just something that I do. And it's really cool to hear you say the way that you do it, because it's like, oh, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I just never had put it like into words. Two things I always say to them too is, is that fair? When I give them a consequence or some sort of, restitution for, something they've done, I'll always ask them, do you think that's fair? If I make them write a think letter, if that's something that, I feel like is fair for them, or, have to clean up the mess they made, or have to, write a sorry letter or go sincerely apologize to someone, I'll be, do you think that's fair? And, more often than not, they say, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe giving them sort of feeling like they have some sort of say in what their, consequences. I had another thing I was going to say too.
It sounds
based
like
on what
you give
said.
them the opportunity to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
Right? So you're respecting them, because as adults, we try to solve issues
Yeah.
together. And it sounds like when you step out and you talk to them afterwards privately, taking them away from their peers, you're respecting them and yourself, giving them choice and giving them the opportunity to kind of think about it, to reflect on it. That's also, that respectful piece there that you both are doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I know sometimes too, one thing that I'll do is I'll just give them some time and space. I won't address it at that exact moment, but I know sometimes the immediate addressal is important in order for them to make the connection of, oh, that's what I did. That was not right. Whereas sometimes when you come back to it too far after the fact, they're like, oh, I don't even remember what I did.
Yeah, they don't remember.
But then, so it depends on the situation sometimes, and the student, of course. Sometimes I feel like it needs to be addressed right then and there. But then sometimes I feel like if they're just kind of shutting down, to just give them that space and give them that time. And a lot of the students I find will just start working again. They'll grab their new piece of paper because they ripped it up or they crumpled it up. They know where to grab their new one, and they'll just do it on their own. And then we'll kind of talk about it afterwards, like, hey, I get you're probably pretty frustrated there. Like, do you think that was the most appropriate way to react to that? And once they have their cool down time and they're in a calm state, I find sometimes it's a better time to talk about, what went wrong. And I feel like we can have a better conversation that way. But then, like you said, like sometimes you just have to stop it then and there. Like that is unacceptable.
Do you think for both of you, making the expectations clear ahead of time so that they know what's expected, and that repetition, that review of those expectations, that constant thing, really supports them in their own understanding and their own ability to follow those expectations? Because when I taught there, that's what I found, is that if I went over an expectation once and really didn't review it, and found that they kept on, especially May and June, right? As a lot of educators right now are experiencing, that classroom volume and all that kind of stuff is getting louder and louder and whatnot. The importance of reviewing those expectations is huge.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then you kind of see the students that need that opportunity to be reminded. But and I think the other thing too is like that missing and lagging skills that we talk about. Just because a student might have been able to do it one time or two times, it doesn't mean that they always get it. And so it's important to have that in mind when you do give those consequences, or you have that restitution of, that however you want to choose it. Maybe it's a matter of directly reteaching that skill and making sure, giving them the opportunity to learn it. So very cool. I love how you guys are at such different ends of the spectrum on your experiences, but yet so similar.
Yeah.
Awesome. So at this point in the podcast, we always do 2 stars and a wish. And I'm excited to hear both of yours coming from such different parts in your careers and experiences. So Nona, would you like to start off first with 2 stars and a wish? And it could be about anything, maybe your teaching career.
Let's see, 2 stars over my teaching careers. It's got to be meeting all the wonderful, unique people as far as students and colleagues and everybody else, and how I'm always learning something. I'm always learning something, and I like learning how to do things differently. So, and I wish that, I guess that there were even more people out there who support us and know what a difficult time it is to help our students, that they would maybe just recognize and remember to give us teachers the recognition and support that we always need.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Nona. And Karina?
2 stars and a wish. Well, the biggest star to me is just like the relationship that I, have with my students. And like everybody always says that when I talk about, my job or about my day, they're just like, you just glow when you talk about it. And that's really cool for people to see, because that's how I feel like whenever I talk about my little kiddos. Like, I genuinely love spending time with them and getting to know them as people, getting to know them as learners, and just getting to have those fun days where, and I'll be honest with them. I'll say, hey guys, like, I had a really fun day today. Like, I enjoy spending my days with you. So, and that's just so real. Like, I really just love getting to know my students and like watching them learn and seeing how they learn and learning about myself as a teacher too and as a person. I mean, this year has been so much growth for me professionally, but also personally, just, through the students and through my, amazing colleagues at the school that I work at. There's lots of support. And, if you need to cry one day because you're overwhelmed or you don't know what you're doing, you know that there's always going to be, 10 shoulders for you to cry on. So that's amazing and huge. And I couldn't imagine doing it without all those amazing supportive colleagues. And a wish, I guess I wish that, it's kind of an unrealistic wish, but it's definitely a wish. I just wish sometimes that we just had more time with them and more, more resources available, more supports available, as amazing as it is, like, to have all the supports that we have, like, to have more, like, could you imagine how much more we could accomplish and how much more we could, help students learn. But yeah, that would be my wish.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, both of you, so much for coming and sitting down and giving up your time after school to chat about the life of a new teacher, the life of an experienced teacher, and kind of the role that your training and opportunities to learn from PopFast, kind of what role that's played within your teaching and the impact that it's had. And it was just a fantastic time sitting down and getting to hear about it. It went much longer than I was anticipating.
It was actually fun.
But
I know. Like, it's so cool to hear stories from an experienced teacher.
And how neat it is to see those connections between you two.
Exactly.
Despite the divide in the year. So, it's so great. So, thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.